So it's now my pleasure to introduce Jess. Now, Jess was raised as part of an armed forces family. Her father has complex PTSD as a result of his military service. And consequently, she's all too familiar with the challenges of living with a parent with complex mental health issues. I first heard Jess speak at On Track in 2021, and I'm delighted to be able to invite her back to speak again this year. So Jess will be sharing her lived experience before reflecting on how life has changed over the past 2 years for her and her family. Thank you, Jess.
Thank you, Kevin, for that really lovely introduction. I think with about 80% of this room after Pat's talk on mindfulness and a little bit of lunch, everyone's ready for a nap. So I'm going to mix it up a little bit and, as Kevin said, share my own lived experience story from a personal lived experience. This time 2 years ago, I stood on this very stage. It was the first time in my life I'd ever spoken publicly for more than 3 minutes. And if I'm honest, when I was writing my speech, and even right up until when I was standing here about to say my first word, I had no idea why what I had to say was important or why people would want to hear my story. And then I spoke. Perhaps to some of you even sat here today because I have actually recognized a few faces, and it all made sense. So often in life, it's easy to feel isolated and think that no one knows how you feel, has experienced what you've gone through, and that you're the only one in the world that doesn't know what you're doing. Let me stop you right there and assure you that out of the in excess of 8 billion people on this planet, 99% of them do not know what they're doing, and they're living a life that hasn't gone to plan. And for the 1% that does know what they're doing and has had a life that goes exactly to plan in every shape and form, I would bow to you now if you're gracing us with your presence today. For so long, we've been conditioned to think that to be successful or to be a good person, we must all follow the same path and have every aspect of our life mapped out, and that if we consider stepping off that path, or even so colouring outside of the lines, then we're considered weak or a failure. Maintaining your mental health with this amount of pressure can be incredibly difficult. And struggling to do so in a world that still sees discussions surrounding the matter as too taboo, particularly with men's mental health, is another story. Gradually, I do believe that the world's view on the importance of mental health and well-being is changing for the better, and I think COVID-19 did massively highlight this. The health service needs to be more engaged with patients, carers, and citizens, and must listen to our needs and feedback. Thankfully, as per the Health and Social Act passed in 2012, NHS England and clinical commissioning groups must now involve the public in their commissioning arrangements, which helps accelerate this further. Not only is the passing of this act brilliant, as input can then be received and considered from all perspectives, as opposed to just a professionalised military view or medical view, but this passing has provided me with the opportunity to be present here speaking to you all today after becoming a public and patient voice group expert advisor in December 2020. Now, last time I came and spoke at the Tank Museum, I told you that I was a daughter of a veteran who had spent the most of his service in Hong Kong, Germany, and during the Troubles in Northern Ireland as part of the Royal Military Police, a regiment that gets a couple of when we hear about it, and that's okay. But at no point when I was telling this story did I tell you who I was as an individual. I told you that, I told you who I was employed by and where I came from. Not actually anything about me. And looking back today, I can tell you that I had absolutely no idea who I was outside of those factors and had completely lost my identity. But this time when I tell you, I'm going to tell you about me. My name is Jess, I'm 24 years old, and I live in the east of England in Suffolk, about 5 hours from here. And I have absolutely no idea what exactly I'll be doing in 5, 10, or even 20 years, and that is okay. I'm passionate about increasing understanding regarding mental health and well-being, implementing change for the better, and making a difference, no matter how big or small. I'm a hard-working, well-driven, and highly enthusiastic individual with excellent organisation skills and a strong desire to achieve. In saying that, however, I also really like just sticking my wellies on, going out for a walk with my dog, and getting lost in a field somewhere with a very, very high chance of returning covered in mud because I don't watch where I walk. Outside of the public and patient voice group, I'm employed by Mediterranean Shipping Company full-time and have been for over 6 years. Within this time frame, I've carried out various roles in operations, customs, and inside sales, but most recently as a trade contract management specialist, which is largely a numbers-based role, which ironically investigates pretty much everything that's gone wrong. Alongside this, I'm now also a mental health trained first aider. Being the daughter of a veteran has been the most rewarding yet challenging frustration I have ever experienced. In 2017, over 30 years after his service, Dad was diagnosed with severe complex PTSD. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you. When I was first told this, I had absolutely no idea what that meant. I'd heard of PTSD before, and I had a bit of an idea about what it was, but never really in any great depth, let alone when severe and complex were added to the equation. For those that don't know, PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, which, as per recent updates in the ICD-11, may develop following exposure to an extremely threatening or horrific or series of events in a short period of time. Now, the main difference between PTSD and complex PTSD is that complex PTSD is more commonly prolonged or a case of repetitive events, which are since categorized as severe and persistent. Although the diagnosis stereotypically has its roots in combat, the medical community has since recognized that PTSD can affect civilians and soldiers alike. No matter the severity, living with PTSD can be debilitating for individuals and those around them. However, the worst part of being told this back in 2017 was having no real warning or idea just how PTSD would impact my life and completely terrorize our family unit. Children who experience PTSD children who experience early childhood trauma, abuse, or neglect are more likely to develop a profound and long-lasting mental health condition, such as PTSD. And this is where Dad's diagnosis journey stems from. After being diagnosed with tuberculosis at a young age, he spent a sufficient time away from his family. In the later stages of his adolescence, his parents then moved to New Zealand, taking his younger sister with them while he remained here in the UK. With no immediate family by his side anymore, he lived with a friend's family temporarily before he enlisted into the army. When Dad used to talk about his military service, I was always under the impression that he joined solely on the basis that he wanted to, or perhaps maybe from a post-war perspective. Not in fact that he was unconsciously in the search for a sense of belonging or to find a secondary substitute family. A place where he could turn and someone was there. A place where everyone thought and acted the same. However, in a place filled by so many, you were taught that the only person you could trust was yourself. After Dad's service, one of the hardest parts of all was transitioning over to civilian life, a phase which our military have previously been expected to naturally transition back into, from a regimented, structured routine where everyone functions alike to a world where civilian attitudes and way of life could not be more different. Slowly adjusting to a civvy life, he joined the police force, where he remained for 16 years. Struggling, however, with his mental health, he was then medically discharged with a sign-off with stress and anxiety, a prognosis and sign-off letter that was issued a little too quickly without enough proper investigation. Regardless of the demons he was facing, however, Dad maintained his role of the man of the family, supporting his wife and young children, who were none of the wiser of how much suffering was happening in silence and that his military service was far from behind him. Now, for anyone sat here today, the term fight or flight might be somewhat familiar to you. The amygdala, which is part of your limbic system in your brain, is considered the smoke detector and emotional memory center. This is triggered if it senses any kind of danger and causes the brainstem to react instinctively and activate a particular mode. Now, it's very likely that if your receptors have been conditioned to autopilot to one particular mode frequently across a long duration, this will be your automatic response. When affected by mental health conditions such as PTSD, the amygdala becomes hyperactive, and those who have suffered emotional trauma will often exhibit more fear of traumatic stresses. Alongside this, other areas of the brain, such as the prefrontal cortex, tend to become hypoactive, resulting in difficulty reacting rationally and a struggle with the recall of certain memories in the hippocampus. When I was younger, I never really realized that Dad was so regimented, or that he could be so erratic or fly off the handle. Nor did I gauge any abnormality at first when he became disconnected and withdrawn from others. I just thought that that's how dads were. He was the person I looked up to most in this world. Strict, yes, Annoyingly anal with timekeeping, probably like 99% of people in this room, yes, but someone I could turn to no matter what. Someone who protected me from all the negativity in the world, someone who knew how to make everything better when I didn't deem fit, someone whose hand I would reach for when I needed to feel safe. However, as years went by, more cracks started to appear on this hand, and it gradually became further to reach and harder to recognize. Amongst the internal struggles of his mental well-being, an ongoing battle with his physical health developed. 2006 was the year we noticed something was wrong. What started off as nausea and headaches developed into dizziness and loss of balance. I have vivid memories of him stumbling around as if he was drunk. He became forgetful and suffered from memory loss, and with multiple visits to the doctor, their prognosis was viral vertigo, but he knew it was something more. It wasn't until he forgot my mum's birthday and a family friend questioned if he was okay. He remembered everything, especially when it came to his wife, and if someone knew him better than he knew himself, it was her. She took it upon herself to march down to the surgery in true Glaswegian fashion, which if you've ever met anyone from Glasgow, they can actually really be quite scary. But she demanded he was seen again by a doctor. After 4 misdiagnoses, in October 2006, he was rushed down to Addenbrooke's Hospital and diagnosed with a brain tumour. Driving in the car the entire way behind him was Mum. Meanwhile, his 6-year-old twins had just finished their day at school and were yet to know that their lives were about to change forever. Picked up by a family friend and neighbour, we were taken under their wing, where they became our secondary substitute family, living with them for almost 2 months. Dad underwent emergency surgery for a total of 8 hours to remove the tumour, prolonged due to the way he was lying on the table. His lungs collapsed and he stopped breathing. No one knew if he'd come out alive. However, the tumour was removed, with all but a scar remaining, allowing people to recognise his physical trauma. Reunited after weeks apart, Dad began to rebuild his strength with his loved ones by his side, regardless of the mental impact they had endured. Soon readmitted, however, with an infection in his cerebrospinal fluid, his twins encountered coming home to find that Dad would be gone again for a little while longer. In 2012, the time arose again, where he came home to find Dad once more. Diagnosed with diverticulitis, he underwent surgery to remove part of his bowel. After complications occurred, he was fitted with an ileostomy, and he remained in hospital for weeks. We came to visit him where I encountered the shell of a man that I once knew. Exhausted and in pain, this was the most vulnerable I had ever seen him, and the first time that I had genuine fear that I might lose him forever. Slowly, though, he recovered and built himself back up with the support of his family and another scar to add to the collection. Little did anyone realize how many invisible scars were sewn tightly shut. Over years of putting the strength of our family to the test, more cracks started to emerge and relationships broke down as our family became disconnected and dysfunctional. Dad became resentful and full of anger, having lost hope in everyone and everything around him. Mum acted as the glue, keeping everyone together, selflessly putting everyone before herself. But in doing so, she lost her entire identity and who she was as a person. With my brother regularly getting into trouble, I vowed that I would never add to the stresses and tackle any and every issue on my own, seeing the positive in everyone and everything, no matter what. Years went by, and our family could not have been more broken. I no longer recognized the man that I called Dad. And he had hit rock bottom, and we were sinking with him. Taking us back to 2017, Dad sought help and approached the Royal British Legion, who referred him down to combat stress, where he then underwent a 2-week assessment in Leatherhead and was diagnosed with severe complex PTSD. Now, I truly believe that the first call for help is when you're at your most courageous. To admit that you are not okay requires strength, often strength that we do not feel we have when we are feeling at our lowest and most vulnerable. Post-diagnosis, and Dad was finally able to receive the support he needed. With another 6 weeks away from his family, he went down to combat stress. He took part in an intensive psychological therapy, surrounded by other veterans battling similar wounds. Upon his return home, he seemed like a fixed man, so optimistic and genuinely happy, I didn't recognize the person that had walked through the door, and to be completely honest with you, I'd thought I'd heard the end of PTSD. But with no further support or check-ins from combat stress, the cracks started to emerge again. Surrounded by people who didn't feel understood him, all of the anger, resentment, and feelings of abandonment came flooding back, and our life began to resolve around PTSD. It became an excuse rather than a reason, and there was little interest in anything unless it was military-related or a civvy failure that he could thrive on. For decades, these psychological war wounds had been hidden and locked away. Pandora's box was now open, with the taunting memories and emotions unleashed. He claimed to his family that he had nothing positive in his life anymore, and those words in itself broke me. All unraveling during my A-levels, it's not until I look back that I realize how much I was affected by secondary PTSD. Feeling emotionally and physically exhausted, I would come home from school and isolate myself, sleeping for hours on end. I began to have panic attacks and feel physically sick, but was told multiple times that I didn't have PTSD, so I wouldn't understand. I couldn't bear to hear that word any longer. Our whole family had reached breaking point and needed help. Upon calling the 24/7 Combat Stress Crisis Helpline, Dad got the voicemail and was forwarded to the answer machine. Calling on the Friday evening and not receiving a call back until the Monday, this cannot happen. People will not reach out if they know they're going to be let down, and a weekend is a very, very long time for a family when a member is in crisis and you cannot obtain any military support. Over the past 6 years, my mum and dad have thankfully obtained various therapy sessions with different individuals and military charities. Dad has been referred into services such as TILS, CTS, Rock to Recovery, undergone EMDR and light therapy, amongst other methods. It certainly hasn't been an easy ride, and obtaining support has been incredibly difficult. But with time and varying responses depending on the methods, individuals, and techniques, we are getting there. However, it takes time for full assessments to be carried out in order to determine the best treatments available, as trust must be earned, and every time an individual opens up to someone, they're starting completely from scratch. Wounds are ripped open, and the emotional trauma is often re-experienced. Now, in the last couple of years, I too was offered emotional support, and for a long time, I was determined that I didn't need it. However, as time went on, I realized I had been greatly impacted by this trauma. I became withdrawn, distancing myself from those around me, keeping everyone at arm's length. In denial and scared of opening up, I didn't think anyone else would understand because they hadn't been through what I had. But when the opportunity arose in May 2019, I decided to share my story. We set a date and time for a second meet-up and our first official session, to which arrived a couple of weeks later. Patiently waiting and waiting, they never turned up. When questioned why they had not attended or contacted me beforehand, they became defensive and listed excuses, unprofessionally sharing details regarding other patients. I felt let down and humiliated, and if I was wrong for feeling the way that I did, especially considering I didn't have PTSD. After that moment, I completely lost faith in the support system, and it took me until the start of this year to finally feel ready to open up again. For a large proportion of my life, I have been the people pleaser, the voice of reason, the I don't care, you choose person. And in no way am I saying that these are bad attributes. However, sometimes the biggest question you must ask yourself is, who is looking after you when you're not putting yourself first? The biggest difference between now and 2 years ago for me is that I'm living to live a life that I want to lead in the present moment by listening to how I feel, what I want, and what I need. I found myself putting my life on hold for PTSD, surrendering my feelings I had and things I wanted to do to ease the pain and be a support network. I never saw myself as an equal and believed that if I suppressed any negative and unhappy thoughts, removed myself from any threats to positivity, and kept myself continuously busy looking after those around me, then I would remain happy. Counseling and the support of those closest around me has been the only thing to make me realize this and start to rebuild myself. I understand that therapy isn't for everybody, and I didn't think it would be my cup of tea if I'm honest, but it has provided me with the opportunity to truly understand my own personal trauma and educate myself not only on who I am, but who I want to be and can be. I've learned that in order to help others, I must look after myself. Now, I'm not telling you that my trauma is completely gone and our family unit is magically fixed, but the difference between then and now is that I truly believe it can be. Some days feel much harder than others, and I don't feel positive every day. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I look out the window and it's all sunshine and sparkles, because it's not. But one thing that keeps me going is that I'm not striving for constant happiness or perfection anymore. And that was actually something that I realized when taking part on a PTSD awareness program in the last couple of weeks. I'm striving to be content from now on. I've since moved out. I make time for me. I removed myself from unhappy friendships. And I say no to things that I don't want to do, even if I don't have something else going on. I'm in a healthy relationship where I can be the person that I want to be and the happiest I can be. And I take each day one step at a time to create an equal balance in my life. Everyone always asked me why I or any of my family hadn't walked away. The simple answer is we do not want to. This is our family, and even though no one is the same as they once were, change can be a positive thing. It is not always a negative, and it doesn't always have to be a negative. This is our family. And with the support of those by our side is what encourages the most growth. Every day since the age of 6, my worst fear has been coming home to find that Dad is gone forever. Regardless of what has happened in the past, we cannot change this, and it is about how we move forwards with things. Things take time to mend and rebuild, and some things may never be the same, but we will stand by him no matter what life throws at us. Now, no individual will ever understand what it's like to be a veteran, let alone a veteran with a mental health condition. However, no veteran with a mental health condition will ever truly understand what it's like to be a family or loved one on the receiving end. To see him here today, a man who has had to rebuild his life, learn how to be a human again, a dad, a husband, a civilian human, was trying to find his identity is a courage that none of us can comprehend. Now, I'm proud to say that I am the daughter of a man who fought for his queen and country, but I am most proud that I can say that I am his daughter, his Pip, someone that I can turn to in any hour of need, no matter what, someone who is more than his military service. Because as people were saying in the previous discussions, so often we look at who the person is as a player or as a soldier, not who they are as a person. Our lives could be very, very different without our troops. However, we must remember that theirs could be very, very different without the support of us. It's time that we break the stigma and taboos surrounding our own mental health and accept that it's okay not to feel okay sometimes. With lived experience from a caring and personal perspective, I'm here as a listening ear, free of judgment, and someone who can offer initial support and guidance, because I've been there. And actually, even if you're in a world or a room or work and you don't feel like anyone else understands, there is someone there that can relate to you. And when I first came here, and I said the thing about I didn't know why I was writing this, or I didn't know why I was telling my story, is that if I can come here and relate to someone, just one person, and change their aspect on things, then I've done everything I wanted to do down here. It's an honor to come and speak to you all, but that is the purpose. It's about making a difference and realizing that we are never alone. And although no story is the same, all are just as important. So I leave you today with the same question. What are you prioritizing over your own mental health and well-being? Thank you for listening.